Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I see that we have quite a lot of participants, so I'll just start off with some of the basic house rules. Welcome to our lunchtime session today. So we're very happy to have our speaker here, Dr. Peter Kawalia, presenting on the topic, Are you tapping into your team advantage? Before we start, some quick guidelines on using Zoom. You should be able to see this menu bar on your screen with three icons: raise hand, chat, Q&A. For most of the time, we'll be using chat and Q&A. Please only raise hand when we are at the Q&A session and you need to speak to ask your question. So if you have a question for a speaker, you can type it in the Q&A panel. We will have some time after the presentation to address your question. During the speaker's presentation, feel free to type it in the Q&A panel, and if we have enough time, we'll get to your question during the question and answer section. For other matters, for example, if you have technical issues or if you need any information from us, you can type it in the chat panel. Also look out for some information or messages that we'll be sending to you here. So to use the Q&A or the chat function, you just need to click or tap on the Q&A or chat icons and then just tap your message in the menu bar, in the panel, sorry. All right, so before we bring in our speaker, just a quick introduction. Dr. Peter Kawalia is a highly qualified team coach with over 20 years of experience in operations with multinational companies. He founded ASIO Consulting, which is an independent consulting business focusing on the development of teams. And based on his experience and research, Dr. Kawalia created the Team Psychological Safety Certified Facilitator Program to help leaders and coaches deliver more impact to the teams that they work with. All right, so without further ado, let us have Dr. Kawalia, please. I'm just going to stop share now. Dr. Kawalia, are you sharing your screen?
I'm going to do that right now, Chao Xing.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yep. Starting. Yep. We see
right.
now.
So thank you, Chao Xing, for the introduction, and thanks all of you for dialing in during your lunchtime. Thanks for the library for setting this up. I already saw a question in the chat box, and yes, I will be sharing all the slides with the library after the session, and then you can access these. So no need to take that much notes, I think. So let's dive right in. The Untapped Team Advantage, that's the name of the book I published last year, and I'm going to spend some time with you to see, hopefully to inspire you again, or for the first time, to consider doing more with the teams you're part of. So feel free to ask any questions, as Chao Xing said, type them in the chat box, but we'll only look at those at the end. Hopefully I have 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. All right, so let's dive right in. The first part of my talk today is what I call untapped potential. Just to make you aware that really teams are all around us. 91% of employees and executives believe that teams are central to their organization's success. And 90% of employees say they spend nearly half of their time working in teams. In fact, I think it would be difficult to find an organization that does not mention collaboration or teamwork as one of its espoused values. Whether it's a large organization or a small one, we kind of all want people to work together. And the reality is that we need to work together. Harvard Business Review, I think most of you or many of you are familiar with a great resource. And the topic of teams, if you look over what's been published over the last more than 20 years, actually, the topic of teams is always up there, especially when it comes to high-performing leadership teams. A little bit like the holy grail that everybody is trying to achieve, trying to look for. When it comes to teams, maybe Steve Jobs is not the first name that comes to mind. He was not really known for being the most collaborative, or at least the image he has of a pretty harsh, straightforward leader. Many people think that he single-handedly came up with all the innovations at Apple, but he himself pronounced this quote, and that was talking about Apple: great things in business are never done by one person, they're done by a team of people. And this is an illustration I like to show to highlight for me what I like to think about when I think about a high-performance team. This is the USA men's relay team, the 4x100 meter relay team. This is not a recent picture. This is actually quite old. Some of you, depending on your age, may recognize some names. If you're young, you probably don't recognize any of these names. But in 1984, this team set a new world record for the 4x100 meter relay. And when a nation, when a country sets up a 4x100 meter relay team, what do? They pick the best. They pick the best individual runners in the 100 meters, put them all together, and then that becomes their 4x100 meter relay team. So there's a few famous names there. Carl Lewis had the world record at some point. Calvin Smith, also one of the top runners. And so the way we look, typically we look at a 4x100 meter relay team is we sum the times, that's the 39.88 seconds. The PB stands for personal best. And then that team working together set a world record of 37.83. So that's kind of an illustration of, and I'll come back on this, the whole being better than the sum of the parts, right? Putting those four individuals together, they run faster than if you would just sum up their individual performance. But the reason I show this example is not because of the US team, it's actually because of another team, the French team, a French team rather, that a few years after that world record set a new world record, right? And you can see the personal best for the different runners, the sum and the world record. And for those who have sharp eyes, you will see that the actual world record was adjusted. That sometimes happens. So what is displayed in the picture there was then later adjusted to 37.79. But why do I like this example? First of all, maybe some of you in the audience are French, but even if you are French, I doubt strongly that you would ever have heard of any of these four runners. They were not global superstars. And secondly, if you look at their personal bests, all of them but one are slower than the slowest American, right? Take a minute to absorb that. In fact, there is one runner with 10:02, but all the others, the three others, have 10:09, 10:09, and 10:12, meaning they are slower than the slowest American, who was Sam Grady at 10.08. And yet they beat the world record of those four super fast superstar Americans. And for me, this is really what we should think about when we think about a high performance team. It is reaching high performance with normal, average people. Now, no offense to those French runners, but the reality is in our organizations, we do not only have superstars. If we only have superstars, then where do the other people go? The reality is that that's the definition of the average. Most people in our organization are average, including ourselves, by the way. So the challenge is, how can I build extraordinary performance, extraordinary results with normal average people? And average here does not mean negative at all. It is just the majority of people are in the normal range. So when we look at a high performance team, and we'll look at that today, I want to emphasize the meaning of high performance. Sometimes when people think about a good team, a high performance team, they think about camaraderie. Now, we'll talk about that in a minute. That is not a bad thing to have. But the reason we call this a high performance team is because of the performance part. And if that performance is not there, we're not going to be talking about a high performance team. Now, compared to the runners, of course, the teams in your organization, well, their performance will be differently, however you measure it, based on your context and your environment. It could be making better decisions, solving client issues, growing employees, striving for stretch performance, having better performance every year. and just continuously innovating and improving. So that is ultimately what it's about. It's about building a high performance team. And I mentioned the camaraderie. I invite you to look at this very simple scheme created by Team Coaching International. There's a horizontal axis, low productivity to high productivity. That's the performance part, right? That is quite easy. And it depending on your environment, your business, you would need to specify what productivity, what performance looks like in your business. And then there's the vertical axis of positivity, from low positivity to high positivity. And that is a climate where people actually enjoy working together. And what we are aiming, so that's high positivity. And of course, low positivity is the opposite, is that what is a situation where that is not the case at all. And so, although there is no real definition about high performance teams, what we aim for, what we strive for, is the top right-hand corner, to have high performance, but also high positivity. Because if we're in the bottom right-hand corner, high productivity and low positivity, well, you might say, well, look, as long as the results are there. But what will happen in a high productivity, low positivity environment is that that's basically an environment where people get things done, but through a negative attitude, to backstabbing, to working against one another. That will quickly lead to burnout. And so you might get high productivity for a while, but definitely not in a sustainable manner. So this is what I call the untapped potential. There's a lot that can be done around teams. Many people strive for high performance teams. Organizations put it as one of their key values. Let's have a look at the reality. Very often when you ask people about their experience with working with others, they will come up with anecdotes that are more often about not so good experiences, rather than, oh, I worked with a fantastic team and we all got so well together and we just in a sustainable way created great performance. When you ask people about their experience with teams, quite often, not always, but quite often, they easier remember the negative experiences. And if you think about how we develop people in organizations, when I look around in organizations, I see a much bigger focus on developing individuals. Well, we call that leadership. We don't call it individual development, we call it leadership development. But ultimately, that is about developing individuals. We don't have that much on the other side of the balance. Looking on the left-hand side, leadership development, we have all kinds of programs. In these days, with everything online, we have online development programs, but very often these are focused on the individual. And then we kind of hope or assume that if we put these formed and developed individuals all together, then kind of by magic or hope, they will turn into a high performance team. And that is not always the case. And I invite you to think what your organization or those organizations you work with and you know about, what do they really do to develop teams? And maybe there's some good examples, and feel free to share them, or we can talk about them later. But overall, when you compare to developing individuals, the examples are fewer and further between. I think one of the reasons is that everybody is familiar with teams, actually from a very young age. Young children are part of sports teams or music teams or dance performance teams. So from a very young age, we don't tell people to be leaders, but we tell them to work with other people. And so they have experiences working with other people in teams. And maybe that's why when we then grow up and get to the organizations, when we think about developing teams, we kind of still have that analogy with teams from fun teams, from our childhood age in mind. Nothing against this kind of team building exercises. They are fun. And I think once we all can get back together physically again, probably many people look forward again to these kind of exchanges. But we have to be honest. This is great fun. It's good to get out of the office and to talk about something else. But rarely these kind of events or exercises will impact the way a team works with others. Looking at the top team, the reality is also that rarely the top team is giving the great example or the best example when it comes to collaboration. Look at the data here. Participants who replied to the survey say that they see, 73% say that they rarely see collaboration on real strategic important projects from their top management. So the good example is not really coming from the top. When you think about teams and look for resources about teams, very often what the resources talk about is about the team leader. Now, the team leader, and we'll come back on the role of the team leader, is very important, but the team leader is not the team. The team leader is an important part, and without a positive mindset, the team leader, of course, can be a major obstacle for a team. But we too often equate team to the person that leads the team. When you looked, this is a few years ago, I think those books are not in the Singapore library, but a few years ago, let's say 5-6 years ago, when you looked for resources about teams, you more easily found books about team leaders, how to be a good team leader, than about actually the team itself and what happens within that team. And finally, a quick anecdote, a story about the super chicken productivity model. This is a real research done with chicken. So I'm going to tell you first what happened with the chicken, and I think you'll easily understand the analogy with our organizations. So William Moore from Purdue University did an experiment where he grew chicken, and he separated them as two groups. One was the control group, where he just kept the average chickens. So the chickens, they lay eggs, there were new chicks born, and every generation of chicken, he removed a number of chicken just to have the average size of the group the same, so that the size of the group remained the same. And he did that by removing just randomly the chickens. So the chicken population remained normal or average. In the other group, he on purpose only kept the biggest chickens. So the small ones, the weaklings, the average ones even were removed, so that in that second group, he only kept the strongest chickens. That's why it's called the super chicken productivity model. And so he raised the two generations of chickens next to one another. And he measured productivity at the end of two chicken generation lifetimes. I honestly don't know how many years that is. The control group with the average chickens had increased its productivity. Actually, the eggs it produced had grown in size by 20%. So that's basically because they were healthy, well-fed, well taken care of, happy chickens. So the productivity in terms of average egg size increased by 20%. Now I let you guess what happened in the super chicken group. The eggs they lay were bigger, but overall they lay fewer eggs. Why? Because in the super chicken group, the chicken actually fought for dominance and they were busy killing one another off. So the super chickens, although individually they performed better, producing bigger eggs because they were bigger chickens, as a group, they actually performed worse because there were fewer of them left to lay eggs because each of them was fighting to be the boss. And I invite you to think about the analogy at work. Very often, the reality is that we hire, reward, promote people, recognize people based on their individual performance. And then we kind of hope, against hope maybe, that putting those super individuals together, they will create a super team. And just as with the chickens, maybe the results are not as dramatic, but just as with the chicken, research has shown that putting super high performance people together often creates more problems than it actually brings additional productivity. And so the final slide in my section about the reality, this is research again from Team Coaching International. When you ask team members themselves to rate the teams within which they work, only 10% rate themselves as high performance teams. And that's in the quadrants, high performance and high positivity, high productivity and high positivity. So this is a bit of my introduction to, on the one hand, picture the potential, on the one hand, the reality. And I hope that you see that there is a pretty big gap that I think we can exploit and explore as a real advantage. And that's why I called my book The Untapped Team Advantage. And Xiaoxing will come back on it at the end of the session, because I really think it is an untapped advantage that each organization has if we are capable of better developing our teams, or of developing collaboration for real, not just as a concept. Okay, let's move into the second part. Let's think a little bit more about teams, and hopefully you'll learn something new and something interesting. Now here, and in 30 seconds, Xiaoqing, I will ask you to launch the poll, please. What is the ideal number of members in a team? And I invite you to see, to have a think about this. So based on your experience with good teams, not so good teams, average teams, what do you think, participants, is the ideal number of members in a team? Can I launch the poll myself, or should you do that?
Okay, I've just launched it.
Yeah, there you go. So there's only one option, one selection possible each time. So see what you come up with as the ideal number of members in a team. So we have 70% that voted. Okay, we're at 83% or 84. I think, Xiaoxing, yes, you can end. Thank you. All right, so thank you. So the winner is 5 or less. Then we have, there is no ideal number. And then we have 6 to 7, 8 to 9. And somebody thinks any number will do. Okay, so thank you for your inputs on that. I'm actually going to give you an answer because there is an ideal number. So we can stop sharing the poll now, Xiaoxing. Thank you. All right. So what is the ideal number of members in the team? Now, before I show you the result, the answer actually, that research has shown. So I think intuitively, you know that if there's too few people in the team, there's not going to be enough diversity, lack of bandwidth, meaning, well, we don't have that much heads rather, to get things done. Difficult succession, meaning if somebody leaves the team, then all of a sudden we are really down to really too few people. Now, if there's too many, we often see that there are sub-teams with divisive behavior, less ownership of decisions. It's difficult to get a consensus and an agreement and an alignment with many people. No real team outside of meetings. So in the meeting, everybody agrees, but then outside of the meeting, sometimes the sub-teams or sometimes individuals kind of go around and, say that what was discussed in a meeting was not really what they think should have been said. Free riding, basically, if there's a lot of people in the team, some people might say, well, I'm not going to raise my hand because somebody else is going to do it. More difficult communication and difficult to find meeting times. So then what is, before I show that, sorry, what I invite you to think about in teams also is too often we think about teams as shown on the left-hand side, right? That's how we show them in an organization chart. There's a number of people reporting to somebody, the team leader. And that's how we visualize a team. The reality is more like on the right. It's the connections between people. What General Stanley McChrystal in his book, Team of Teams, called, it's about a horizontal connectivity. That really is where the work, where the exchanges is getting done. Yes, the leader is important, but again, he or she is just one person in that team, amongst those different connections. And here we go. The ideal number of members in the team is 6 to 7. And this is based on research. So it's not my opinion, it is based on research. And the reason I show 5 to 9 and then 12, so research basically says that the good number for members in a team is 5 to 9, with the ideal number between 6 and 7, 6 or 7. And 12 in brackets, because it is true that some researchers go up to 12, but they are a little bit in the minority. If you look at most of the research around teams, people say the good range, the ideal range is 5 to 9, and within that, 6 or 7. And what I invite you also to think about is that when you bring a team together, think about the smallest number of people you need to have the skills and the resources, the time to get the work done. And sometimes we fall into the trap of, well, we could also invite Susan because she also probably has some ideas. But then if we invite Susan, we also have to invite Mark, because otherwise Mark will think that we are leaving him out. And there is sometimes a tendency to please everybody and therefore invite too many people. And the question we should ask ourselves is the opposite one. Who can we remove from this team? It doesn't mean firing people, but from this team on this project, on this initiative, who can we remove so that we really have the smallest possible number of people that can get the work done? I highlight the number of connections, the horizontal connectivity, and this is why 6 or 7 is one of the reasons. It's been demonstrated academically, but one dimension to think about. When you put n number of people in a team, then we often look at the team and say, well, there's n people, right? There's the leader with maybe 5 people, so that's 6 people. And the number we look at is 6. What we really need to look at is how many connections exist between those 6 people. Person-to-person connections. And the little formula is shown there, and the result is at the bottom of the screen. So a team of 6 people, yes, of course, there are 6 people, but there's actually 15 connections at play. And the leader, he or she, is part of, with 6 people, 5 connections, but there is 10 other connections between the other members of the team. And you can see quickly that if you increase the number of people, just go to 9, you get to 36 connections. And I let you imagine or calculate what it means if you have 12 or 15 or more. So when I talk with people and organizations about teams, I never ever go above 12. I do not think it is. You can have 12 people in a department, but that is not the same as putting 12 people in a room and say, we're going to work on something together. We're going to solve a problem together. When we think about team, we need to think about putting people together and they actually work together. They create something, solve a problem, come up with an innovation or whatever. And that is almost impossible with 12 people in the room. So I invite you to look at the chat box again. I'm going to ask you to type in, just when you think about high performance team, what in your experience are the typical ingredients, characteristics? What do you need to have a high performance team? So feel free to put something briefly in the chat box. We're not going to go through the whole list. So I see trust, I see empowerment. Trust is an open mind. Personality, good personality, I assume. Big hearts, diversity, common goal, communication, a good facilitator, agile, trust. So thank you for those thoughts. That is typically what the common goal, accountability. All right, thank you. Now, this is typically what we hear when we ask people to think about high performance teams. So this is just an example list. I think most of the answers I saw on the screen were there, except for the first one. I'm going to come to that in a minute. So what happens very often when you look for resources, you will have some expert or some guru claiming that it's diversity or that expectations are clear or there is trust. And people often say that what they claim to be the most important is, of course, what counts. So when the company Google looked at exactly this topic, why are some teams doing great and why are some teams struggling, teams within Google, they launched a project called Project Aristotle, because Aristotle was the one to say, I've quoted him before, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so they wanted to understand why in some teams, the whole, that team with its dynamic and performance, seemed to do better than just the individuals put together, whereas for other teams, it was the opposite. They put pretty smart individuals together, but when it came to working as a team, things didn't work out very well. So that was called Project Aristotle, and the results of that were published end of 2015. And Google is pretty good at looking for patterns. So the first pattern they were looking for is like the personality, the kind of people, to what extent, what kind of people do you need to put together to have a great team? And they found out that they could not come up with a clear correlation between patterns of personalities and then team performance. And they concluded quickly that what seemed to make the biggest difference was something called team norms. That's what Google called at the time team norms. And so they then found out that this thing called team norms is actually part of, or to put it more simple, equates to team psychological safety. And one of the persons typed that in the chat box, and of course this is the topic of the chat today. So yes, you were right. Google found out that team psychological safety is by far the biggest element impacting team performance. This is actually the results that Google shared to the world end of 2015. You see the resource at the bottom right-hand corner there. And the reason psychological safety is in a different color is because they found out that psychological safety within the team is actually 4 times more impactful than dependability, structure and clarity, meaning and impact. So the result was really striking. It's not just, well, here's one of the 5 important elements. No, it was really the most important element by far. And then, of course, what Google in particular shared is that what they observed in those teams that were doing very well was 2 characteristics or key behaviors. Equality in distribution of conversational turn-taking. I literally take that sentence from the publishing. Basically, that means people speak in the same proportion. There is not one or a handful of people or 2 people dominating the discussion. Everybody, the team has created the habit of making sure everybody speaks, contributes, asks in the same proportion. And the second behavior is what they called in their report a high average social sensitivity, meaning people in the team feel, are aware of, and take into account how others in the team are, in what situation others in the team are, how others in the team are feeling, instead of just, pushing through their own ideas. They had a sensitivity to how others are dealing with a particular situation or a particular challenge. And of course, when Google shared that information with the world, it was as if they had discovered the Holy Grail, and it was in several articles, and even on CNN. CNN ran a segment on how to build the perfect team based on Google's research. Now, I'm going to take you a little step further and bring you to what psychological safety really is about, and that is sometimes gone over a little bit too quickly in the communication that's out there. First of all, the topic psychological safety for the individual is something that's been looked at and studied a long time ago, since Abraham Maslow created the hierarchy of needs. I put it there on the screen. He was the first one to talk about the fact that a human being has psychological needs. And so William Kahn developed that further to look at psychological safety within the work environment. And then Professor Amy Edmondson, her name is at the top of the screen, was the first to coin the term or the notion of psychological safety as something that exists at the level of a group. It's not just at an individual, but it's something that exists in a group or in a team. And the definition she gave for team psychological safety is a shared understanding by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So that's a mouthful, and I think it's worth to spend a few minutes on that. The key word she uses, the key term there is interpersonal risk-taking, and I would like to invite you to spend a few minutes to think about that. Now, first of all, when you think about taking a risk, let's do the easy one, investing money. When I invest money in the stock market, I know I'm taking a risk. Now, here's a trick question, so don't answer. When I invest my money, do I expect to gain money or to lose money? Of course, I expect to gain money. That's why I invest. But I'm aware that this is a risk, and I know that I could lose my money or some of it. So a risk is something that an outcome where I'm hoping for the positive one, but I am aware that I could be faced with the negative one. So that is taking a risk, especially in the world of investment. Now, what about interpersonal risk? So this is not spending money, but this is taking risk with other people. By the way, it's interpersonal, so there's not really about a team yet. This is just when I engage with other people, communicate with other people, work with other people, I am also taking interpersonal risks. What could be the gain or so it means it's something I do, and I think I'm hoping for a positive outcome, but I know that the outcome could be negative. Now, the positive outcome would be in the realm of interpersonal work in relationships, for example, is appreciation. I feel that what I did is appreciated by the people around me, by the other people I talk to. But I realize that sometimes it could be the opposite. And what I'm doing could be I could be joked about, or people could gossip behind my back. So an example, asking a question may sound like a very simple example, but why asking a question can be considered as a risky behavior when it comes to interpersonal situations. When I ask a question, I of course hope, let's say I'm asking a question, well, you know, Susan, why do you think that? I hope, and my intention is that the other person will appreciate the question and will build on my question, and we continue to build our relationship. But in some situations, it could be that I get the opposite reaction, that people go like, what a stupid question. How can you ask that? Don't you know that? So the asking of the question in itself is a risky behavior, because I'm not sure how other people will react to it. And here's a list of examples, and the examples is not exhaustive. And again, I will share all these slides with you after the talk. So these are possible behaviors that actually constitute taking a risk in a team. Saying, just let me pick one example, there's many out there. Saying you don't agree. Let's say in a team, somebody says they don't agree with what's being said. Now, the intention that person has, and this is important, the intention is positive. The intention is to help the team maybe be aware of something that they might not be aware of. But just by saying you don't agree, the team could either say, oh, that's interesting, Peter, please tell us why and explain why you think that, and let's build on that, let's act on that. Or they might say, well, this is how we're going to do, this is how we've always done things, and you know, you better fall in line. So you can see that the atmosphere you create becomes very different depending on how the team reacts. If somebody gets a positive reaction to the interpersonal risk they take, they will most likely repeat that. They will feel that this team is safe for speaking up, for saying you don't agree. If, however, they get negative reactions, feedback, they felt humiliated, whether it's in front of their face or behind their back. People are smarter when it comes to interpersonal connections than it comes to investing their money. When I lose my money, I might think, well, that was just a fluke, let me try it again. When people are faced with interpersonal negative outcomes to taking interpersonal risk, they will quickly stop taking that risk. And instead of saying they don't agree, they will just be quiet and hope nobody asks them. So these are examples of taking interpersonal risks in a team. They sound very neutral, but the way the team reacts to these behaviors in a strong way impacts the way how the team will learn. And this is actually to complete the study by Edmondson. Her study was really, she demonstrated that team psychological safety here on the left actually impacts positively team learning, which then in turn develops team performance, high performance teams. And she developed that with cardiac surgery teams, where teams needed to learn how to use new, innovative cardiac surgery procedures. Those teams where people, including the surgeon, including the nurse, with the hierarchy that existed, those teams where the team was comfortable to speak up, to take these interpersonal risks, to say, hey, doctor, I don't agree, or where the doctor was comfortable saying, I don't remember this, does anybody remember what we have to do now? Those teams learned faster and therefore had a better performance when it came to the surgery than the other kind of teams where people were not comfortable to speak up and where issues or mistakes were just hidden. So those teams learned slower and therefore improved their performance slower. I'm going to skip a slide or so, but don't worry, I'm going to send you everything as part of the deck here. What is interesting is that neuroscience has really shown that as human beings, our brain has developed, fortunately, to deal with threats. When we see a danger, a physical danger, our brain will go into survival mode. When you see a car crossing the street, you don't need to spend a long time, and you're about to cross the street, you don't need to spend a lot of time to think, what should I do now? You will jump out of the way. That's become innate. That's become a natural reaction. So all our brain will do when it's faced with a threat is look for survival to save my physical life in the case of the physical threat. And the same happens in the social environment. In fact, neuroscience demonstrates now that our brain reacts in the same way when I'm not faced with physical threats of the lion or a car coming at me, but with social threats, with people people reacting negatively to the kind of interpersonal risks I just described. And so if you don't know that, I really recommend you to look up the SCARF model by David Rock. It really is a good illustration of neuroscience-based model of how we react differently, very strongly differently, from threats versus rewards. So that's why the green arrow is much smaller, because we like to get rewards, we like to we respond positively to rewards, but our brain's reaction to negative social threats is much more significant. So one big social hiccup or issue or challenge actually will put us back much further than a sum of positive reward responses. So the team psychological safety model that I am talking to you about today, this is really what I talked about until now. And I just want to go make sure I cover a few more things. So it is really team psychological safety develops team learning, which then in turn develops team performance. And really team psychological safety in Edmondson's research is made up of 7 different statements. You see, these are not questions, these are statements. Example, if you make a risk on this team, it is not really held against you. Member of this team are able to bring up problems and tough issues. So really team psychological safety is not just one big blurb. It is really the sum or the combination of all these elements. And this is from Edmondson's research. So when we look at measuring team psychological safety, we will actually ask people in a team, don't forget, no more than 12, to answer this very simple survey. To what extent do they agree, strongly disagree, to strongly agree, of these 7 statements? And we will translate that assessment from strongly disagree to strongly agree in numbers to be able to manipulate them a little bit. And we will then visualize how all the members of a team, this is a team, I believe, of 11 people, has answered these 7 statements. And on the left-hand side, you see the total team psychological safety in a team. This is the combination of all team members' answers on all 7 statements in the team psychological safety survey. On the right-hand side, you see the picture for 2 out of the 7 of these sub-elements I show you here, asking for help and mutual support. And then we play a little bit with numbers. Don't worry if you're not familiar with arithmetics. We're not going to go too far here, but we look at the average, which I think is quite easy to understand, and also the standard deviation. So the standard deviation is a number to indicate the extent of deviation or spread for the group as a whole. Please answer in your chat box, which is better? Which team has a better team psychological safety, the left one or the right one? There's only 2 options. I'm not going to wait for everybody to complete, but I'm just going to have a quick look. Which one is better, left or right? I see right, 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 right. Okay, good. Interestingly, the average is actually exactly the same. The average calculated from transposing the statements strongly agree, disagree to the numbers 1 to 7, they actually have the same average. Interesting. So why are we saying that the right one is better? And in fact, the answer is correct. The right one is better because the standard deviation is lower. And this is a little bit counterintuitive. So average, the higher, the better. Standard deviation, the lower, the better. Because on the team on the right-hand side, you can see that even if not so many people maybe mark strongly agree, but there is a bigger consensus of the team about where the team is at. And the reason this is important is because the definition of team psychological safety is a shared understanding. So before we spent some time to look at the interpersonal risk-taking part, but here really, if that understanding is not shared by the team, if it is more like the left-hand side, some people think, yes, fully agree, but other people think exactly the opposite on the same questions, then it means there is no alignment within the team about what the team is facing. So the right-hand side is a bit better. We measure the report. We measure that for a team. We create a little report. This is just a sample report. I will send that as part of the output. And we show the 7 elements in this traffic, what I call a traffic light graph, with the red zone meaning those of the 7 elements where the average is lower and the standard deviation is higher, meaning the result is not very good. And on top of that, there is a big dispersion of how people assess this. And of course, the green area is the opposite. So these are just some sample examples. I've measured this now with 61 teams all around the world, actually, a bit in Asia, of course, but also quite a bit in Europe and the Americas. And this is the result of what I have found every time for total team psychological safety. So the ideal zone, if I can say, is high average and high and low standard deviation. Be careful on the vertical axis. The vertical axis is reverted, right? You can see that low standard deviation is at the top of the axis, which is better in our context, as opposed to higher standard deviation, which is opposite. So be careful, that's a reverted axis. So this is the result of 61 teams. The ideal zone is top right-hand quarter. Probably the disaster zone is bottom left quarter. I also, and here's I'm going to ask you to help me a little bit, and I need to take a minute or so on this. We've also looked at all these 61 teams and seen which of the 7 elements, and I summarize them here again for you. Which one do you think, based on your gut or your own experience, would be the element out of these 7 that's in the green zone, that's really far out in the green zone? And in a minute, I will ask the same about the red zone. But first, the green zone. Which one do you think is the element of the 7? So you got to either have to type mutual support or appreciation or taking risk or reaction to mistake. Please type in the text chat box. Which do you think is in the green zone, is on average a strength for most teams, at least the ones I've worked with? So green means it's a strength for the team. The team is doing overall quite well with a high average and a low standard deviation. Now, this is a bit difficult, of course, right? Because you, but just from your understanding experience. So I see several answers. Mutual support comes back quite a bit, appreciation. So I'm gonna show you the result, but then I think more importantly is, or well, equally, but still, I think we also gonna ask the same question about which was in the red zone. So in the green zone, we have asking for help. These are actually real results, right? So I didn't plot these. These are the result of these 61 teams. They say that it's easiest, more easy overall than the other elements, to ask for help. What about the other 6 elements? So which one would you think now is in the red zone? Which one is, on average, for most of the teams, a challenge? the biggest challenge rather, sorry, not a challenge, the biggest challenge. I see reaction to mistake, taking risk, reaction to mistake, dealing with issues. Interesting. Taking risks, reaction to mistakes. All right, interesting. Here's the result. Indeed, again, this is just a snapshot of 61 teams, but it seems that people feel very uncomfortable when, or feel that the biggest issue is how other people in the team react when mistakes are being made. And they say that that is often the key area on which they need to make progress. So thank you for your inputs there. Now, I want to make sure I show you the complete model. We don't have time here. I would need another hour, but you see the bottom of, I think I've explained everything in the model, including the 7 elements that are there on the vertical pillars. But there is also a bottom layer, and that is what we call in academic terms the antecedents, or really what causes team psychological safety. But what we've done so far is describe it. But there are actually elements that determine team psychological safety. Supportive organization, trust and respect, the leader behavior, there we go. We said we we're going to talk about the leader again, the team dynamics, and the extent to which the team can practice on becoming a better team. Again, no time to go in much detail about that today. Just want to say one thing about trust. I know that was mentioned before at the very first question I asked. Trust is a very important part, but trust is not the same as team psychological safety. And just for you to think about it, trust is something I can give to one other person. Team psychological safety is something that other people, more than one, give to me. So in the concept, they sound similar, but the research and the work that's gone in depth about these two concepts is very different. Trust I can give to one other person and then another one, but I cannot trust 5 people at the same time. When I say I trust 5 people, really I mean I trust person 1 and I trust person 2 and I trust person 3. Team psychological safety is something others give to me, meaning when I take these risky behaviors, they will react in a positive way. And the other to highlight about is, of course, the leader. And as is the tendency, people easily talk again about the leader. So there are, of course, some publications around how a leader can foster psychological safety. And this is actually from Edmondson's own book, how the kind of behaviors that a leader can have to foster psychological safety. And I want to make sure it's not just being nice to everybody. You can see it's also setting boundaries, it's also using direct language. Yes, it's also listening and being approachable, inviting participation. But in the end, it's about creating performance. And to create performance, we need to be 6, 7, 8. We need to use direct language, set boundaries, and hold people accountable. I have 2 more slides I want to show, because in the end, it's all nice to measure that, but so what? Because a report is just a report. Of course, we need to try and impact team psychological safety. And I've done that now with quite a number of teams where I measured it, not all 61, but quite a number where I measured it. I worked with the team for a number of months, typically, and then I measure it again. And here's just one example. I'm not going to read everything, you can see it. So the team worked together to try to improve the employee satisfaction that came out of a survey. We used a tool called Belbin, which I quite like. It's a good team tool. And then we ran 4 action learning sessions where I was the coach. And again, the purpose of this program was not to build psychological safety. In fact, we didn't even talk about psychological safety. The purpose was for this team to work together and to solve a problem. And the problem was the employee satisfaction had dropped a lot in the last survey. And here was the result, 4 months between before and after. So is this fantastic or spectacular? I don't know. It is what it is. But I have constantly in the examples, in the teams I worked with, where I was able to manage to measure before and after a number of sessions with them, I have always seen an increase in average, sometimes not a lot, but what I've always seen without exception and very significantly is always a very clear drop in standard deviation. And so that means that the team, again, we are not working on psychological safety. We're just working together to solve a particular problem in the organization. But doing so with this methodology called action learning, we actually start to get better aligned on what it is to work together as a team. And this was my last slide. I'm going to give the microphone back to Xiaoxing. Again, I will share all these slides with all of you, and I would be happy to see if there's any questions or clarifications that I need to address. So, Xiaoxing, back to you.
Hi, thanks very much, Dr. Kawalia, for your sharing on tapping into your team's untapped potential. We have a lot of questions. Let me just start with the one with the most upvote. So Kim Hai says that he or she has a problem with team members who just don't speak, and because they're not his or her direct reports, it's hard to have a direct conversation about what they feel, why they don't speak up. So how can equality in conversational proportions be achieved with members like this?
And is she, I just want to make sure, is she part of that team? And the comment is about the others in the team, or are we just talking about another team somewhere else?
It sounds like they're in one team.
Okay, and
So,
this person
yeah.
asking the question is part of that. Yes, well, that's you're probably in the bottom left quadrant of the team, and depending on your role in the team, here's how I would say: if the team and the team leader is not interested to make progress, then I would say don't waste your time, because nothing's going to happen. If the team feels, if the person asking the question feels that, I would suspect other people feel the same. And it means that on the positivity line, we're probably towards the lower end. That is not sustainable. I don't know to what extent this team has the capability to by itself try to make progress. What often helps is an anonymous survey, is actually to measure the team psychological safety. So before trying to jump in and say we should be talking more to one another, if the team is interested to develop itself, sometimes that comes from the leader, sometimes it comes from the team itself, we can measure team psychological safety. And there probably you will see some rather sad results from judging from the question. And that would be a starting point. But obviously we're not going to make, change everything in a fortnight. This will take time, but it is a team role. So the leader plays an important role, but in all my work I do with teams, I never say, leader, you have to do this or that, but I say, you as a team, this is how you answer to these questions in the survey. What do you guys want to do about it? Now, I don't put it that simple, but basically it is up to them if they want to make progress with that. You cannot force people to want to make progress, but I think if the questioner feels like that seems to say that she's not very happy in that situation, I would suspect others are not very happy in the situation as well. Nobody likes to work with other people where there's a negative situation, but maybe the group hasn't had an opportunity or an avenue yet to talk about that and to address it. And so I don't know if you can shake up the tree, or if it's the leader to take that initiative, do some anonymous survey. That sometimes helps to get the big elephant in the room, turn it into a topic that can be discussed. And that's just a starting point.
Okay, thank you. So another popular question, what if you find, actually related to the earlier one you answered, what if you find team members difficult and unpleasant to work with? So difficult team members.
Mm-hmm. So the question I always ask when I hear that question is, do you think that these team members come to work every morning to say, I'm going to be a difficult and obnoxious person to work with? I doubt it. I hope it's not the case, because that would be quite sad. Very often when we say other people are like this or like that, it's because we don't have a connection with them. And I don't think they will think that we are that great either, whatever they will think about us. I try to avoid getting deep into people's personalities and psyches. I just focus on behaviors in a team. And in a situation like that, and this is a part of a typical work I do with teams, we would say, what are the behaviors in this team? We don't try to understand why people are the way they are. I think that is going pretty far, but what are behaviors in this team that we want to stop? Now, a behavior is something that is observable. Okay, having a closed mind is not is not a behavior. That is my interpretation of a behavior. Maybe the behavior is always answering with single words. That is a behavior. If a team can get a discussion about what behaviors pull us down, and then let's work together to try and start to change those behaviors. Again, that's a first starting point. But I always say that I don't think most people come to work to say, I really want to be my baddest today and I want to make everybody's life miserable. So again, it is trying to focus on behaviors rather than personalities. That is my take. I know some people have a different take, but that's what I focus on. Improving some behaviors one at a time, small bits at a time, no major, big bang approaches. And I think that that very often helps a team to get out of its fossilized ways from the past.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to jump on ahead to a question about boundaries because I think that's in response to something that you just mentioned. So you mentioned setting boundaries. So what does that mean, and what boundary are you referring to?
Okay, so that was in the slide about leader behavior. A leader needs to set boundaries. Needs to say, okay, team, we here's our objectives, here what we to go. But there's also boundaries to what we want to do and not want to do. We all know this is not going to be new. We need to give people the freedom to find their own way to improve performance. We need to have a clear goal, vision, mission, etc. But there also have to be boundaries. There have to be things that we say, the team leader says, and maybe the organization says, well, there's some things we're not going to do. Okay, obviously illegal things, but then there could be other things where the team leader will say, we want to achieve our performance, but not at all costs. Okay, so that's the idea of the boundaries, to just show there are limits so that people don't say, well, you didn't tell me I could not go and steal a client from another division, just making this up on the spot here now. That's what we mean by setting boundaries.
Okay, thank you on that. I'm going to merge a couple of questions about the team number, team size. So is the team size, is the ideal number dependent on the required project deliverables and scale? And is it better to have an odd number in a team than an even number?
Interesting on the second part. And I think that I will assume now, but the reason somebody asked, is it better to have an odd number, is I think it is because when we vote, when you have an odd number, you always come up with a decision or a conclusion. But no, that is definitely not what we should be looking at. A team in this concept of a small number, we should not be thinking like, if we have 7 people, let's vote, 4 say yes, 3 say no, so let's go with the yes. That is definitely not the way to go. No, the answer is not that. Well, the research is clear that for a team to work efficiently, effectively, high performance, high positivity, the ideal number is 6 or 7. And yes, maybe for bigger project, it may be 7 or 8, and maybe for smaller projects, it may be 5 or 6. But it is nowhere has somebody said you need 15 people to deal with a big project. Allow me to clarify 2 things. These 6 or 7 people, it doesn't mean that they do everything by themselves on themselves, so by themselves alone. They will interact with other people in the organization, but ultimately they're the team and they're responsible to get the things, whatever needs to be done. So it's not as if, they do everything alone by themselves. The second comment is, I often hear this question, people are a little bit surprised about that number. Now, if you have, but 2 things. First of all, if you have 10 people in a management team, it doesn't mean that you need to get rid of 3 of them. It means that for a particular project or initiative or whatever is the topic, you need to find 6 or 7. And then maybe for the next project, you find another 6 or 7 or some of the same. Not everybody has to be in every project all the time. And those people who are still not convinced about, 6 or 7 is a good number, I invite you to do the test. Put 10, 12, 15 people around the table and tell them to solve a problem and see what happens. I think you will quickly be convinced that that is not working. Either somebody will take the lead, and then often the leader, and then it's not really a teamwork anymore, or things will just turn into polite chaos. So it just doesn't work to actually work together. I always say, look, you can put 20 people in a room and have them watch a PowerPoint presentation. But that is not teamwork. That is not collaboration.
Okay, thank you. I think we're quickly running out of time, so maybe just last couple of questions. Um, how do you manage remote and diverse teams of multi-generational and diverse cultures in a VUCA environment?
Well, that's the real world. Everything's VUCA, everything's virtual now, and everything's several generations. And what I always say, every team is different. So there's no official guideline. I've measured team psychological safety and worked with one extreme to I've worked with only male Westerners teams, and I've worked with completely the opposite, people from different countries, younger generations. Every team is different. I don't say, let me put it this way, I've always managed to help a team do better. Now, sometimes the results, the improvement is different, again, but that's normal because the starting point is different. So it's a big question. How do you deal with, well, I always say the team is the team, and that is the starting point. If the team has a terrible past, well, that's the point from which you start and you try to make progress. If the team is just come together, that's a completely different context. And I always invite leaders and our team coaches, or I do it myself, just look at a team, what it is today. We measure team psychological safety. It's a one moment, it's this moment in time. And then we say, what can we do better in the next couple of weeks? Example that I mentioned earlier, which behavior can we stop doing because it's negative? What can we do differently, etc., etc. So no good answer other than to say that every team is different and we need to take the team as it is. We never have to say to this team, hey, but you know, that other team, look at what they're doing, because that's going to be another team in another situation. So I always take the team as the starting point, and ultimately that's where the work lies. That's where all the resources lie when you work with a team.
And lastly, what is the one thing that you think we can all do to improve team advantage in our workplace? If there is a most important thing, or
I was not expecting that question. That means it's all the others were good, but I'm gonna go back to my slide about the leadership behavior. I know you don't see it now. I would say, okay, it's a good question. When people take these risks that we've talked about, asking a question, saying they don't agree, try to not go into your default answer or reaction, which is often to say, to maybe, I'm not saying this is the case, but to not to oppose what they just said, is to acknowledge the fact that they're taking a risk. And if you react to it positively, even if initially what they say is kind of rubbing you the wrong way, listen to what they say, try to build on that a little bit before jumping in with your own opinion. And I think by doing that, you're gonna, whether you're the leader or not, you're gonna allow people to more easily open up. And I would say that all of us can do, whether I'm a member or a team leader, try to create some safety when people come up with new ideas, ask questions, say they don't agree, say they're confused. Just create some space where they can express that, encourage them to elaborate, try to work with them so that next time, that's the example I took before, if they take that risk and they're smacked down, they were never going to take it again. So if they take that risk and you can create a response, an environment, a reaction where they feel listened to, appreciated, maybe not exactly everything's going to go the way they think, but at least they feel listened to, they don't feel shut down, they will probably grow stronger in that they feel that they're comfortable to ask these kind of questions, they're comfortable to take these kind of interpersonal risks with you. That would be my answer.
all right, thank you very much, Dr. Kaulia, for your presentation today and your very insightful sharings. To end off, I'm just going to point everyone to Dr. Kaulia's book, The Untapped Team Advantage. It's currently still in NLB's reference section, but we will be having those books come into our public libraries in a few weeks, probably a few weeks. So do look out for that. There are also other books on, I think we have books beyond just leadership. We also have books on team building, fixing your team. So these are all available on NLB's Overdrive site. Do check them out. I'll also be sending this post to you in the email later on, so do look out for that. Next week, on Thursday at the same time, 12:30 to 1:30, we will have a talk on who moved my privacy. So if you're free, do feel free to check this out. And lastly, before you leave, we'd just like to ask you for a few minutes of your time to send us your feedback. You can either scan the QR code or access this link. So with that, we've come to the end of today's session. I think we've all benefited very much from Dr. Kaulia's sharing. So thanks again so much, Dr. Kaulia, for your time. And thanks. And we didn't mention this earlier, but thank you so much for calling in from. I believe you're in Thailand.
I'm in Thailand, exactly. I'm in
Yeah.
Chiang Mai, north of Thailand. So
Wow. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from there. And thank you everyone for joining in a lunchtime session today.
and thanks for the opportunity again to you, Chao-Ching, and the National Library.
Thank you. All right, so I will just be leaving this slide here for a few minutes, and then I will close the session. So, yep, have a great afternoon ahead. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.